Okay, everybody, we're going to start getting rocking and rolling here. Try to hold off as long as we could. We're waiting for a couple other people to show up. We're going to start off with the first guest speaker here.
One touch up a little bit.
His name is Attorney Joseph Nahas.
I don't know, because I think it's done in the
software. For those of you who are not familiar with Mr. Nahas,
because when you do it before it starts, it says on.
I'm going to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sorry about that. Our first speaker is going to be Attorney Joseph Nahas. He was on CNN. He was in New York Times twice for a case that he's handled regarding federal encroachment to certain individuals. If I could have a fantastic round of applause for this man. He is truly an icon when it comes to fighting the federal government in law, in the courts.
I won't need this because I got a very big mouth. And so I'd like to thank Chief Kessler for having me here today. I'd like to thank all of you for having me here today. I'd like to thank the FBI, Homeland Security, and whoever else is here in the audience gathering intelligence at this meeting here today. And I don't want to forget the State Police. I know you're all here because you want to discuss and hear about the Second Amendment, and you want to hear about gun rights and so forth. I'm not going to touch a lot on that subject. I will tie into it, though. The reason why I'm here is rather than bore you or lull you to death regarding the Constitution, I'd rather talk with you about things that I have been actively involved in and things that will affect you not only as American citizens, but things that will affect you more so as mothers and fathers, which in my line of work, even though I do what I do, what's most important to me is my family. And I think that's probably most important to all of you here today. In 2008, July 12th, there was a call on 911, and the call stated, "Man down." That man down was Luis Ramirez. He was an illegal immigrant, and he got involved in a melee with several young men from Shenandoah, and he died. Now, when you look at the case, and you think about the case, and what happened with these young men who are in federal prison right now, there's a lot of questions I have as a father, there's a lot of questions I have as a lawyer, and there's a lot of questions I have as being a citizen of the United States. And that's the case that I want to talk about with all of you today. That particular case has been on CNN, that particular case has been international, and certainly heavily locally, and there's also going to be a movie made about it. I did not represent the boys, I cross-examined them, I represent the chief of police, because all the police were charged. The government went after the police after they went after the boys. But I think it's important that you understand this case. I think it's important that you understand what happened to these young men. And I think it's most important that you understand how the government was able and had the right, well, they didn't have the right, but how they say they had the right to actually be involved and arrest these young men. And what I'm about to tell you is factual. This isn't rumor. This comes from FBI 302s. This comes from me working the case for over 2 years. This is what had occurred. At 11:30, well, about 11:22, several young men were walking from a hose company, much like this firehouse here, an event. And these young men were walking, and they were underage. They were about 16, the average 17, and they had some beers. And they were walking, and they saw a man by the name of Luis Ramirez. And Mr. Ramirez was 25 years old. And he was with a 14-year-old girl who he was involved sexually with. Those of you not from Pennsylvania, that's rape. Statutory rape. And he was having a sexual affair with this 14-year-old girl. These young men were walking down the street. The one young man yells over to the young lady who he knows from school. I think she was in 8th grade. And the young man, I think, was a junior. And he yells, "Hey, shouldn't you be home? It's 11:30. A little late to be out." There was some verbiage going back and forth between Mr. Ramirez and the young boy from Shenandoah. And Mr. Ramirez approaches the boys and starts to fight them. And quite honestly, starts to put a lick on 2 or 3 of them, one at a time. At which time the fight was broken up. Mr. Ramirez goes back to the park with his girlfriend. And the boys are walking away. Now this next part is very important, because this next part is how the government got involved in this matter. As the boys are walking away from the fight, the youngest of the boys, who I think was maybe 15 at the time, or young 16, yells back to Mr. Ramirez, "Go back to effing Mexico." Okay, now, I had this boy on the stand in the federal case, and the FBI 302s and all the witnesses, he definitely yells at this man. Ramirez takes off all of his bling, hangs it to his girlfriend, rips off his shirt, runs a half a block, and engages the kid, and begins to beat the snot out of him. Again, 25 years old, a teenager, a skinny teenager at that. Ramirez ends up beating this kid, and he's yelling for his buddies who are leaving, who are gone. A young man who's in federal prison right now by the name of Colin Walsh starts to run to help his friend, as all of us, if we were in high school, would have done the same. Walsh goes running, boom, hits Ramirez with a runner. He called it a runner from the stand. On the chin, Ramirez goes down, 11:35, hits his head, and he's dead. That's what happened. Now, the government's take is people came, kicked, trounced, didn't happen. The medical evidence wasn't that way. Now, the boys are all charged in state court in this county. The boys end up getting convicted of simple assault, which is pretty much what it should have been. And they did about, I'm going to say 60 days in jail. But it wasn't over. It wasn't even close. Because a gentleman who should have been doing time for years himself, Mr. Ted Kennedy, got involved. And Ted Kennedy got involved, and how do I know Ted Kennedy got involved? Well, this isn't rumor. Ted Kennedy got involved because I talked to the U.S. attorney, who said to the police, Mr. Kennedy said, you guys are going to go to jail, we're going to put you in jail. Okay, so this stuff isn't rumor, this is factual. So Ted Kennedy gets involved. Ted Kennedy says to the FBI, get up to Schuylkill County, see what's going on. They're beating up illegal immigrants. It's not the case at all. These were high school boys, didn't know this man was illegal, didn't know where he was from. They just knew he was with a little girl, a little classmate that was 14. That's all they knew. FBI comes in, and they're working the case with the district attorney's office at the time. Okay? They were there the whole time in this county. The whole time. When the boys, and there was marches on our courthouse from groups like MALDEF and so forth, when the boys end up not getting convicted of the higher crimes, which is the homicide crimes, the federal government swarmed in and charged them. Now, all of you here, I'm sure, you know, and the Fed, and you know a lot about the Constitution and so forth, should know how could the federal government get involved in a local crime? It didn't involve commerce. There was no mailboxes blown up. How was the government able to go in on a fight? How could the government do that? What probably no one knows in this room is those boys were charged for violating the Fair Housing Act. Okay? Oh yeah. Just so you know, 2 boys are doing 9.5 right now. And Colin Walsh, who testified against him, is doing 4.5. And by the way, his dad died while he was in prison. He was in there about maybe 3 months. His dad died while he was in jail, and he didn't see his father die. Okay? Let me tell you something. On July 12th of 2008, about 1,000 lives were ruined. Easily. 1,000 lives. Granted, Mr. Ramirez passed away, the alleged victim. His family is forever mourned. And these children's lives were destroyed, as well as their parents. And the relatives beyond them. Let's talk about the Fair Housing Act. And this is how this is going to all tie into what you guys are here for today. What the Fair Housing Act was designed in the 50s and in the 60s for racial inequality was that if you lived in a neighborhood and wanted to keep out someone who was Jewish, someone who was black, someone who was Hispanic, any kind of minority, you couldn't do that. You tried to use intimidation or violence or force to keep them from living where you lived and where you stayed. That was a violation of the Fair Housing Act. And if you did that, you would be in jail. And good, you should be in jail because people can live wherever they want to live. That's the beauty of America. Well, what they said was, due to the fact that those boys were walking home, I told you about the first fight, I told you about the second fight, when that one boy, who by the way was not charged federally, when he turned around and said, go back to effing Mexico, the feds viewed that as a violation of the Constitution, whereby they said that he has a right, of course, to be there under our Constitution. He's a right to housing. And therefore, they said he violated federal law, and that's how they came in. Now, although the Supreme Court would not hear this case, they just shot it down. They wouldn't hear the case because they didn't want to hear the case. Here's the deal. First of all, an individual has to have a right to housing. This young man was an illegal immigrant. Does he have a right to housing?
No.
Right. That's the first thing. The Fair Housing Act protects citizens of race, but they're citizens from the United States. But still in all, just because you come from another country, you still are protected by our laws. And that's fair, because you just can't hurt someone just because they're from another country. And I believe that you should not. But with that said, those boys didn't know where he was from. They didn't even know he lived in Shenandoah. And this fight was teenagers fighting a man, and it had nothing to do with race. Nothing. They didn't try to preclude him from living there. They didn't try to preclude him from living anywhere. They didn't know where the heck he lived. But the government came in, and see, the government has a civil rights division. These guys I went against were from D.C. They weren't your local U.S. attorneys. And they come in, and they go around the country, and they're down in Sanford, Florida. It's their next case now with that case. And they go all around. They prosecute police, and they prosecute people for violating civil rights. Now, I had these boys on the stand. I had Colin Walsh on the stand, who the government had Colin flip. And what I mean by flip, they had Colin testify. He was the guy who hit the guy, and he had him testify about whether or not it was race. You know, what they did was race orientated. And as I had him on the stand, I said, "Are you prejudiced?" He said, "No." Was any of the group prejudiced? No. Did you know, he lived in Shenandoah? No. Did you fight him to preclude him from living in Shenandoah? No. I didn't do any of those things. And son, what are you doing on the stand here? What are you testifying to? Why? Well, the government explained it to me. You got to love how the government explains things. Well, the way the government explained it to me, Mr. Nahas, is that, what I did could be construed as racial, so, it was wrong, so here I am today. Literally, that's what happened. Now, it was argued before the Third Circuit, and the Third Circuit struggled with the Fair Housing Act, but let the government do it. Let them do it. And now they sit in jail for violating the Fair Housing Act. That's what those boys are in prison for today. Not for beating somebody up, or not for attempted murder, for violating the Fair Housing Act. And that's why they sit in prison today. Two boys got 9.5 years, Walsh got 4.5, and like I said, he was in maybe about 4.5 months when his father passed away. His father was a friend of mine. So what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is, if the government wants to come after you for something, they will couch it under something, and they'll get you. Their conviction rate is about 99 or 98%. They then arrested all the police. I represent the chief of police. I had a 1% chance of winning. We won. I had another case with them again, and he just got charged with conspiracy. The jury came back that night. They called the judge, said we got the verdict slips messed up, and we were confused. And three jurors called. He ended up getting 9 months. He ended up doing 9 months for that. He was facing life in the one. He was facing, I think, 30 years on the other. So they spent over $1 million. He got 9 months. He's doing fine now, the chief. Other officer did well. The other officer got convicted. And another officer won also. So it was good. It was two very hard cases, two very good cases, but two very, very disturbing cases, because these were good kids. And I tell my own kids when I go home, and I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, you tell your children, don't hit anybody. If you hit somebody and he falls and he dies, I see these things. But again, you don't want your son getting beat up either. So it's a fine line between protecting yourself and not getting assaulted. And it's very difficult. But I say these things to all of you to show and to explain that the government can couch these things, the laws, and they can manipulate the law, construe the law to their own benefit. and it's inappropriate. The other issue you guys might be thinking is, how are they charged both federally and in state court? One second. They can be charged both federally and state court. It's not double jeopardy. It is not double jeopardy. So if the federal government doesn't like the way the state had handled it, they can come in and put the clamps down on you. Sir?
So why wouldn't the First Amendment, with all that moving around there, the fact that he said something and they made it into a racist, why wouldn't it just why would it never be brought up?
Right, you've all heard that. Here's what you have to understand. The Constitution is several hundred years old. And again, I'm not going to get much into the Constitution. I could be here for weeks. But the Constitution has to evolve, okay, with time. Everything has to evolve. Things aren't the same as in the 1700s. We are not the same. Well, no, it does. The Constitution, everything has to evolve in life. You can't live life the same as you do. The reason why that didn't come up, freedom of speech, okay, is this is why. Is because you can say what you want to say, but under the laws that were written in the Supreme Court, you can't do it to preclude or in a threatening fashion. I can't say to you, I'm going to blow your effing brains out and pull a gun out on you. That's assault.
Pardon me, you can say it. Pulling the gun is the problem.
Actually, and I'm a defense attorney, sir, and I do this for a living.
Well,
I'm going to advise you not to say it, because it could be terroristic threats
I
also.
understand because government's corrupt.
It's terroristic threats. Well, I'm going to advise you not to say it. I mean, we could fight it down the road. You could pay me a ton of money, and we could do that. But I mean, I'm going to advise you that if you say to somebody, there's a right way to couch it, and I don't want to teach you that, but I'm just saying that if you were to say, if I wasn't a gentleman, I'd smash your skull in. Well, then that's not a threat, okay? Because you are a gentleman, I'm sure. But the point is that there's a right way and a wrong way to say things, but the problem is for instance, if you put a cross on someone's lawn, okay, if you read the law, the statute, I think that's 8 years. Or it's 4. If you burn it, it gets trumped at 8. Okay, so you got to watch, and that's how the laws are. So it wouldn't have been a successful argument, unfortunately. Now, I think that with that said, and the issues that are with government, I don't know. Do you guys watch? I'm sure you guys are Fox News guys, right? You guys watch Fox News? You don't like Fox News? You're more of an MSNBC guy? No. I like Fox News though. And there's a lady on Fox News by the name of Laura Ingraham. And Laura Ingraham, there's a lot of violence right now in our schools. And it started back in Columbine, and it's continuing in Sandy Hook and so forth. And as soon as these things happen, and it happened in Columbine when I was a young man, but I was working at the time, they immediately wanted to go overboard in regards to, it's quick reaction. The gentleman here is in the gray shaking his head. That's what the government does. It's quick reaction, and it's always an overboard reaction. What the government doesn't see is, and there might be some disagreements here and there might be some agreements, but what the government doesn't see is this, is that when you look at Sandy Hook, when you look at Columbine and so forth, and I'm not going to...
They were worried, some of the residents that attended the meeting were worried that in Delaware County, a sheriff, the Attorney General in Delaware is trying to strip the sheriff from their arrest powers in Delaware. Now, I could look at that 2 ways. I think in Schuylkill County right now, it's a blessing that my sheriff doesn't have arrest powers. Okay, because you can imagine him and his thugs coming around your doors, kicking your doors in, and he's anti-gun. He violated my secretary's constitutional Second Amendment right when he sent 2 of his thugs, and they're thugs, to their house without a court order, without a PFA, nothing, and demanded that they surrender firearms that were given to my secretary's husband by his brother, because his brother got in a little bit of trouble. Well, when you have 2 armed thugs show up at your house saying, we're going to take your guns whether you like it or not, what are you going to do? And you have a female answer. And if you know my secretary, she's the kindest person you ever want to meet on the planet. It cost them over $1,000 to fight this tyrant, this sheriff of ours, to get their guns back. And it's disgusting that they had to be put through that their family had to be put through that the firearms were handed down from grandfather to father to son to nephew, over 100 years old some of them were. And this sheriff, this illustrious sheriff, who thinks he can walk on water because he has sheriff in front of his name, disgusts me. And he needs to go. So with that, I'd like to introduce Pat Reynolds for Sheriff of School County Sheriff.
Who here has a concealed carry permit?
Nope.
Who does not?
It's not a concealed weapons permit.
Who does not have a license to carry a concealed weapon?
I have it.
Who does not? Why not?
I didn't get to the court.
Because I do not need a permit to carry a concealed weapon.
That is something that is put in place by the government to keep the weapons away from you. And that's one of the things that we need to stop. I deal with people every day. I'm a constable for the state of Pennsylvania currently. Constables were the first law enforcement in the nation. You can't get any simpler than that. Yet they try to take away our powers every day, from the constable to the police officer. The constable is the constable and the sheriff is the only elected law enforcement personnel in the state. Without those two people being elected, you have no voice in saying who you want to protect you. Am I not right?
Yep.
Okay. I hate microphones.
Good. Good, Pat.